and when it happens. And something else Mo was quite right about. So back in 2011, I just returned from Rwanda. I'd been out there volunteering, spent a lot of years in financial services and consulting before that. I was a trader back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I had some pretty screwed up thoughts and relationships around money, and figured that the best way to help the poor is to go and be one of them, despite my dad's advice to the contrary. And so I kind of quit that life, went out and volunteered for the United Nations. There's nothing like seeing families in extreme poverty to give you a very different perspective on making money, giving money away, on taking on debt as well. So I was just over £60,000 down before I'd even gone to Rwanda, just through really bad consumption habits. I don't know whether you can relate, but I just used to spend far more than I was bringing in, and it didn't actually matter how much I was bringing in. More would always seem to find itself going out the door. So I was already just over 60 grand down when I went, and went out there, and anyway, just ended up giving away a whole lot more, because I just felt that the people that were asking me for it needed it more than the banks that I was borrowing it from. And it was just that I was always told in my spiritual world that I'm a conduit. You're a conduit for money, you're a conduit for knowledge, so I just became the fucking conduit. It just flowed through me like you wouldn't believe. And I was out there for a few months, literally ran out of money, had 20,000 Rwandan francs left in my pocket, which is less than $1. The irony of the whole thing was, having been in financial services, having been a consultant, basically having been a douchebag, you just don't travel anything less than business or first, particularly if you're going to Africa and you're going to have to get dust in your nails and in your nose and in your hair. So the irony was I had a first class return ticket from Nairobi with BA from Nairobi to Terminal 5, but I didn't even have enough money to get my connecting flight from Kigali, which is the capital of Rwanda. So I hitchhiked from Rwanda to Nairobi, didn't realise quite what danger I was putting myself in. Like I said, a total douchebag in those days. A partly douchebag now, I would have thought. And managed to get back to London, and it was really then that I kind of spotted up exactly where I was in my mental capacity, in my physical capacity, in my spiritual capacity, my financial capacity, my vocational capacity, social capacity, charitable capacity, and it was just a big fat fucking zero. And I don't know if you've ever had that situation where you sit and you think,
okay.
Yeah, that's exactly the word. And this is without any gin and tonics, you know, without a couple of bottles of Malbec through a straw or anything like that. It's totally straight-headed, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm absolutely buggered. This is a nightmare. And I started drawing back on my kind of economics and financial services education, and to help me get out of this £107,000 worth of debt. So just one of the things that I couldn't help thinking about was how I never wanted to be there again. Like being a minus £107,000 with no assets. This is not mortgage debt, this is just consumer debt. There's something about being 6 figures down in consumer debt that is just a little bit kind of arse twitchy, if that's even a term regularly used in Peterborough. And it's slightly concerning. But everybody I talk to, including my father, who never really tells me anything as such, you just watch how he acts and how he behaves to see kind of what to do and what not to do. But even he was saying, look, you really want to make sure that you get that debt paid off, you get that debt paid off, you get that debt paid off. Hands up if you've ever heard that, get the debt paid off. I want to get the debt paid off. Actually, hands up if you want to get your debt paid off. Yeah, but actually, what does that really mean? What does that really mean? Where do you want to get to get your debt paid off? The big fat freaking zero, correct?
Well, that would help, yeah.
Well, I'm not so sure if it would, Robert. I quite like the look of 107,000 as opposed to a zero. Forget the fucking minus. So I had this real challenge with getting the debt paid off. I didn't want to be at zero, but more importantly, and you're right, zero is better than the minus 107. But you know what? More importantly, I didn't want £107,000 to be the biggest number in my life. And quite often for people that are in massive amounts of consumer debt, the debt figure is the biggest number in their lives, perhaps in your lives. It's like the number that drives everything. Do we go on holiday this year? Well, how much debt have we got? Can we afford to buy a new house? Well, how much debt have we got? What about a new car? Well, we're already 60 grand down. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It becomes like the biggest number in your life, and I just couldn't work with that, because I've never, as well, I mean, you don't get into £107,000 in debt by being conscious of debt. I've just never been. Numbers are numbers. It doesn't matter about the plus or the minus in front of it. It's just a big number. And this was a blessing in disguise, a real blessing in disguise. Because what I then started to think about was, how do I make debt the smallest number in my life? And the easiest way I could see to do that was to add a zero onto the end. See, on a zero, I can't really add anything. But as soon as you add a zero onto the end, what you're now able to do is to say, okay, now 1,070,000 is now my income target. And in 2011, I made that my income target. I didn't attach a time scale to it. I didn't say I'm going to do this in 12 months, I'm going to do it in 6 months, but I just made that my income target. And so every decision I made from 2011 onwards was made on the basis that my income target was 1,070,000. If that makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
And that
is that every year?
Sorry?
Was that every year?
But you know, at the time, I didn't put a time scale on it, because it had taken me around about 10 years to get into that much debt. And you know, admittedly, it was kind of exponential. It started off slow, and actually, as soon as I tipped 50 grand, the journey between 0 and 50 was probably 8 years. The journey between 50 and 107 was 2 years. Because fuck it, once you're 5 figures down, you're 5 figures down. The next threshold is 6 figures, isn't it? But it was ironic that I just tipped 100 grand and shit myself. And it was just, oh my God, that's a lot. So I didn't put a time scale on it to start with. I just said, that's my income target. And interestingly enough, what we teach, we run a business incubator, what we teach our entrepreneurs is not to have any interim goals other than a 25-year goal and your next 90-day sprint. So what is it that you want to achieve in 25 years, and what are you going to do in the next 90 days to get closer to that? And the whole concept of a sprint comes from kind of, in the corporate world, something called agile. But anyway, the point is that you sprint 90-day periods, because you can just about control a 90-day period. It's 13 weeks. You can just about, if you think about the last 13 weeks, there probably hasn't been a huge amount of volatility, and it probably hasn't been hugely different to what you kind of expected it to be, unless of course you've had a massively volatile 13 weeks, in which case that doesn't count. But for most people, any 13-week block isn't that volatile. So that was my income target, 1,070,000. I just said, okay, in the next 90 days, what am I going to do to get myself closer and closer and closer to that? But one of the first things I needed to do was to make sure that anything I do that takes me towards 1,070,000 isn't put at risk. Because by this stage, 2011, I was born in 1978, so I don't know, what does that make me? 30-something? 30-something.
20 years younger than me. Oh, yeah.
But in my head, and actually in reality, we were just talking about landlords potentially losing their portfolios. In reality, anything past 30, 35, and you haven't got that many cycles to make it big. Hands up if that makes sense. You just haven't. If you look at an economic cycle as, it used to be 7 years, then it was 10 years, but this latest cycle, we're already 10 years in, and we've only really just started the uplift. I mean, we're just seeing now 2-bed apartments that we invest in Peterborough, 2-bed apartments that we bought back in 2005 for around the £145,000 mark are only now back to that level. Now that's not to say that other properties that we haven't escalated in price. We bought ones, for Pretty, and I bought ours for peanuts in 2000 and something, 3 years ago, and we've had a massive uplift in that. But in the kind of the rental property market, certainly in Peterborough, the two bath apartments. They're only just now back to where they were. And there's a lot of reasons for that, of course. But if you think about this cycle, if we're only in the uplift, actually, when is the downturn coming? We're overdue a downturn and we haven't even lifted ourselves out of the last one. Hands up if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that from with my economics head on, it just looks like, even though the numbers, inflation numbers, interest rate numbers, levels of consumer debt in comparison to per head, in comparison to GDP, all these numbers tell a very bad story. They tell a worse story than those same numbers back in 2008. But actually the climate's different and we're doing a lot more to kind of sustain the growth. So I don't know when the downturn's coming, and I didn't know back then when the downturn would come again. But what I needed to do was to ensure that anything I do doesn't jeopardize what I've built. And so I drew back on this whole concept of allocation ratios. Hands up if you know what allocation ratios are. Anyone? One, brilliant. It's based on, it means I'm in the right place, otherwise you'd be bored out your fucking minds and you would never have me back again. So allocation ratios are based on the notion of allocating your net worth in a very simple way, so not in an overly complex way, but allocating your net worth across the liquidity spectrum. And I'll talk to you about the liquidity spectrum in just one second. Hands up if you understand the liquidity spectrum. Okay, so a couple of things I'm going to cover for you. And they're fundamentally based on net worth. So hands up if you know what your net worth is to the nearest £1,000. Okay. So that's the first thing that you've really got to do. Even if it's negative, doesn't matter. Just get that number and use that number to drive everything that you do, to drive all of your decisions, because that's the only true measure of wealth. Like, you can be skint in terms of cash flow, and we, to be fair, Pri and I usually are. Like, we're just, because all of our cash is allocated in accordance with our allocation ratios. So we very rarely have any spare cash. We keep our living expenses down. We're not tight. We enjoy a good life and great holidays and kind of all that stuff. And she buys whatever handbags she wants because I think she deserves them, and I buy whatever gadgets and cars I want because I think I deserve them. But the point is, we haven't let our expenses increase in line with our income or our net worth. And that's kind of just a throwback to how my dad used to be. But if you don't have that number, and if you don't know what that number is to the nearest £1,000, you're really navigating through this wealth creation journey very blindly. And you're then, in essence, being led by maybe somebody that starts talking to you about cash flow, or somebody else that starts talking to you about something else, or Bitcoin, or this, or that, or the other, or trading, and everything's always about making the money, but nothing is ever about managing and multiplying the money. And what allocation ratios allow you to do is manage and multiply your money whilst still maintaining an overall focus on making money, because you can't manage and multiply what you haven't got, correct?
Yeah.
So the point here is that there's a couple of things. First of all, net worth. Now, a quick word on net worth. A lot of people ask me, should you include your residential property in your net worth? My answer to that is, when you're filling out lending forms and they ask you for your net worth, yes. But when you're calculating your own real net worth, no. And what I mean by that is, when you're filling out a form for funding, they ask you what your net worth is. It would be silly not to try and inflate that as big as you can without crossing the line into bullshitting, correct? But for your own purposes, your net worth is what you have left after you sell everything. That's the definition of net worth in basic terms. What you have left after you've sold everything. But the reality is, what you have left after you've sold everything, you'd quite like to count what you have left after you've sold everything in the comfort of your own home, correct?
Yeah.
So adding your equity that you have in your residential home onto your net worth is it's a vanity figure. That's why I say use it for loan applications, but don't use it for your own calculations. And if I may be so kind of cautious, Colin, our approach is, and I really see bits of my dad coming in here, and then bits of this reckless buffoon, and the two have a real, they just have a fight in my head and my heart constantly. Not my dad and me, but the cautious Colin in me. So what Pri and I are doing is paying down our residential home as quickly as we possibly can. So the idea is that we'll have that paid off before we have children, and then that is, it's secure, nothing can touch it. Then you can go out and be a bit riskier because you've got a roof over your head. Now, I know that the general advice in a lot of places is refinance your residential home to pull out the equity and then kickstart your property portfolio and your investment journey. And there's merit in that, although that's the kind of thing that scares the shit out of me, to be honest. I just don't think putting your residential home on the line is ideal. And if you do borrow against it, try and get that paid down as quickly as you can. So that should always, the roof over your head, in my mind, should always be your top priority. Everything else comes secondary. So net worth, what you have left after you've sold everything. So,
would you count a student loan in that?
and so anything that you owe, I would count in that. Now I know student loans are,
It's a bit funny.
yeah, it's a bit funny because chances are you're never going to pay it off,
Yeah.
you know, and it's going to be written off, to be fair. But if that's the case and you've counted it, i.e. you've taken it off your net worth and it gets written off, dude, you're laughing. That's 20 grand extra that you've now got that you didn't think you had. Of course, just Colin will pay his mortgage off, but somebody else might go out and get smashed out your head and have a brilliant 7-star holiday, you know. But do you see what I mean? So, and that's the same with any questions around including or not including anything, or any investment decisions. If the net effect of including it or not including it is positive for you, then to make that decision. In this respect, the net effect is positive for you. If you include it, brilliant, it just gives you something more to work towards. And if it's written off, brilliant, now you've got that bit more, yeah? Great question, by the way. Liquidity. So liquidity is quite simply how quickly can you turn something into cash? So how quickly can you turn this into cash versus how quickly can you turn this into cash? Obviously, that's already cash, so that's highly liquid, and that is worth fuck all. So you're just not going to be able to turn that into cash, really, are you? Oh, I'm sorry. This is the latest model of Kingston Clicker. It's Bluetooth enabled. It's got a pointer laser on it. It's got rubber texture so that you don't slip. £2.25 to the nearest bidder. So liquidity is how quickly you can turn something to cash. Adam, did you have a question?
No.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. You wanted to buy the clicker, didn't you?
Put it down.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I got booed off stage. Wouldn't be the first time. So liquidity, how quickly can you turn something into cash? So the liquidity spectrum then is highly liquid, and in essence, illiquid. If you can even spell it, Dillon. Yeah, so illiquid and liquid. Cash sits at the liquid end. What do you think sits at the illiquid end?
Back clicker.
That clicker's going to get it, isn't it? Every month. Poor little clicker. Yes, but in our world, what sits at the illiquid end? In fact, I could probably, you give that to one of the junkies outside Leeds Station, and they'll turn it into cash quicker than you or I could, because they don't care what they get for it.
Yeah.
They just want a quid. Make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I take that back, little clicker. I love you. Bricks and mortar. So your bricks and mortar sit at this end, correct? Now, should draw the windows on and that, shouldn't I? Not roll house. Now, the whole idea is to protect that. And the saddest thing that I see over and over again is investors, developers, landlords work a whole cycle to build their portfolios, and they work their nuts off. They sacrifice time with their family, they spend Tuesday nights in rooms like this, they spend weekends down in Peterborough, and it's just relentless. That drive to build the portfolio is relentless, correct? Hands up if it's as easy as you told it was. Yeah, is it fuck? It's really hard. And 80% of what you do is stuff that you don't enjoy doing, correct? You know, you don't enjoy all aspects of being an investor or a developer or a landlord. In fact, I go as far as to say I don't enjoy most aspects of being a landlord, a developer, an investor. 80% of what I do in our property business is the stuff that I don't really enjoy. 80% of what I do in the incubator is the stuff that I don't enjoy. 80% of what we do in our metals refinery, we've got a metals refinery in Switzerland, I don't enjoy. Really, only 20% of anything you do you're going to enjoy. The rest is what you've got to do to get that 20%. So the point is that actually this is really tough, and it's hard fought and it's hard won, and you take on good debt, but actually you've still got to make payments on it, which means that money's got to come somewhere. And if you're making payments on debt, it means you're not withdrawing money from the company, it means you're not enjoying it. So what happens is, when the times are good and in the upturn, landlords and developers and investors sacrifice everything to build, with a view that one day, at some stage in the future, you know, they'll sell off a third of the portfolio, pay the rest down, and now they've got a ton of income, and the whole portfolio is unencumbered, and it's all going great. You might resonate with that vision for portfolio development. But the only thing wrong with that vision, and I'm not saying your vision's wrong, but the only thing wrong with that vision, as I've described it, is there's no mitigation for what might happen between the time at which you are now and the time at which you sell off a third of the portfolio and pay the rest off, and now you've got an unencumbered portfolio. There's no protection for what might happen between those times. And chances are, the year before you're going to sell off, the last deal you do is the one where the crash hits halfway. And so now you've got a half-built development, or you've got a half-converted HMO, or you've got a commercial conversion that now you can't get the conversion finance on, and it's just sat there. And you borrowed 500 grand against your entire portfolio to go in big on this last big deal, you know, the last big job. And that's when you get your pants pulled down and you lose everything because you didn't protect anything. And so the use of allocation ratios and understanding what sits at what end of the liquidity spectrum, and doing much more work here, understanding allocation ratios, understanding what sits where at the liquidity spectrum, that's 2, and number 3, understanding that you need to do much more work here to generate cash will really allow you to protect the portfolio. And more than that, it will allow you to capitalise on the downturn. And that's a horrible thing to even think about, capitalising on the downturn. In fact, it's why I got out of financial services, because we made so much money when the dot-com bubble burst, but you just feel very dirty at the end of a month when you look at what you've made, and you've basically made that money on the demise of companies that are no longer listed because their IPO went belly up. You've just made 200 grand off the back of it. You do feel really dirty. So even now I think about this concept of capitalising on a downturn, actually what I mean is this. Think about it this way. We're all in a property investors network, and chances are there will be a minority of us, and it will only ever be a minority, that will use allocation ratios, and we'll set up our portfolios in this way. And so when the crash comes, we'll have equity, we'll have gold, we'll have cash. So it really doesn't matter what the market's doing, we have all these 3 things. Equity makes us lendable, so even when the banks aren't lending to anybody else, they'll lend to us because we're lendable, we've got equity. Gold in essence, allows us to shore up what we've already got, because we turn gold into cash when the downturn comes. So what the gold will allow you to do is, in essence, make up for the rent roll. Because what happens when markets crash? Your capital values go down, correct? But what also goes down? The rent roll goes down. And this is the bit that most landlords don't really account for. How much of a hit on your rent roll could you realistically take before you're, as 98% of the UK population is, before you are as well one washing machine breakdown from absolute disaster? If you think about it, how many months could you go without rent roll and still, with the cash reserves that you have, still make your mortgage payments across your entire portfolio? Most landlords, and I'm not here to be doom and gloom by any stretch of the imagination, I want to give you a vision of a much more positive future, but in order for me to do that, I've just got to highlight maybe some of the glaring holes that we all have, by the way. This is not a me and you thing, but we all have glaring holes in our investment strategies. And if you just do that calculation, how many months could you go with 0 rent and still keep your property portfolio afloat? Like most landlords, 1 or 2 months. So how different is that from being a family in one of the houses that we rent out in the area that we were brought up in, which is a less than salubrious part of Peterborough. Not that there are any more than salubrious parts of Peterborough. Yeah. Actually, no, I take that back. I fucking love the city. But how different is that if you're only 1 month away from your entire portfolio going down the pan without you having to restructure, refinance, pull any money out? I'm talking about keep things exactly the same. In economics, we call it ceteris paribus. All things remaining the same. How many months could you go without rent roll and still be left with a portfolio? If it's 1, you're in the shit. If it's 2, forget about it. 12 months and you're kind of okay. 12 months gives you some breathing space, correct? This is why I talk about paying down your house and just get a roof over your head, unencumbered. Then you don't have to worry about the roof over your head as well as having to worry about all this shit. So the whole idea is that the gold will allow you, when you liquidate the gold, it will allow you at least to support the monthly repayments. So you've got equity in the portfolio, you liquidate the gold to support the rent roll, so now you're lendable and your existing portfolio is secure. And in the trading end, the cash generating end, chances are that whatever you're doing at that end is going to take a hit as well. So that end, you may as well assume is just going to dry up. And that's the business and commerce end, which I'll kind of talk about in a second. So in principle, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about understanding what your net worth is at any given moment in time. We're understanding what the liquidity spectrum is, and that bricks and mortar sit at the illiquid end, cash sits at the very liquid end, and gold sits in the middle. So gold sits in the middle right there. And in essence, it's about next understanding how much of your net worth is tied up in each of these 3 core areas, what I call liquidity zones. How much of your net worth is tied up into each of these liquidity zones. And for most investors and developers and landlords, everything's here. Everything's here. And the only cash that's coming in is any cash that's coming in from the rent roll anyway. And maybe a day job if people have got a day job on the side and they're moonlighting as a developer or an investor, maybe any day job income. But in essence, everything is in some way, shape or form linked to the portfolio. Which means when the shit hits the fan, all that work that all of us have been doing for the last decade or so goes down the pan with it. And so my point about capitalising on the downturn, we've already helped a couple of landlords out in this way. So with Section 24 coming in, there's a lot of landlords that are kind of on the edge with it all. So what we've been able to do, and this is what we hope to do more of when the crash comes, is to say to those landlords, look, we'll take your entire portfolio on, basically as a lease option. We'll make sure that we make your mortgage payments, and so you're not defaulting, you're not going bankrupt, and in essence, we'll cash flow the portfolio for 7 years, and at the end of 7 years, we'll give you the portfolio back. So we're not making any money on the capital values of those properties, and that's not my intention here. But my intention is to say, how do we, as a community of landlords, particularly the proportion of us that will manage our portfolios, how do we step into the gap when the shit hits the fan, and you've got people that you've been coming to the same networking meeting with for 10 years, or 5 years, or 8 years, when you've seen them at Progressive over and over and over again, and maybe they just made a mistake, maybe they leveraged their portfolio to put all their money into this commercial conversion or land development, and it was just one mistake, one kind of chasing the big dream, one last project, and now the banks are knocking at the door wanting that money back. They're the people that we can help. So when I talk about capitalising on a downturn, I kind of mean about capitalising in a social sense, stepping in and helping other landlords, protecting their portfolios for them, making sure that they don't lose everything, because ultimately we're kind of all in it together, right? You know, we share capital, we share ideas, we share deals apparently, but that's what we do, don't we? And there's a lot of people that will be in a lot of shit when the next downturn comes, because the rates of debt, the consumer debt, have gone up substantially. And people are living just like the good times again, and actually it's not the good times at all. I mean, it is a good time, to be fair, but it's not the good times. Okay, everyone with me so far? Hands up if this is useful at all in any way, shape or form. Okay, so that's, if you like, the strategy. What about the tactics? How actually do you make this work? What are the kind of numbers that you should be aiming for? And how do you actually keep allocating and reallocating is the key thing to stay safe? Well, it's dead straightforward. If you think again about the liquidity spectrum, and I like to keep things simple, so although I was in financial services, I'm not really that bothered about any other investment vehicle other than bricks and mortar, gold, which ironically kind of looks the same, which always sounds strange. Well, it doesn't look the same when I draw it, and cash. That's all I'm interested in. I really like to keep things simple. I don't want to have to make a million different decisions on a million different investment vehicles when the shit's hitting the fan, the markets are tumbling, and I've got to decide what to do. I want to be in a situation where I'm making quick decisions. Now, of course, this isn't financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, blah, 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 the usual stuff. This is just my personal wealth creation philosophy, which has seen us, like I was saying to Mo, we've been really blessed. We've had some really good years since 2011, 12, 13 was when it really turned around. So the last 4 years have been amazing to us. So this is just my philosophy of how I'm trying to keep it safe and how I'm trying to get a social return on the wealth that we're building as well. So in order to keep my decision making safe, if all I've got to decide upon is, okay, what do I do now with these 3 things, then that's fine. And if you think about wealth creation, the wealthiest families on the planet, what do they own? What do they control? They're not interested in fixed income derivatives and bonds and all that shit. They create those things to sell to everybody else, correct? But those fuckers own the central banks, and they own the gold mines, and they own the gold refineries, and they own the precious metals supply chains. That's what they own. They own the land, the cash, and the metals, the raw materials. They turn all of that stuff into other investment vehicles for everyday people to feel like they're playing a part in investment, correct? And you've got your little self-trade account on your iPhone and buying and selling shares. I don't mean this to sound patronising at all, I promise you, that's not my intention here, but think about it this way, when the shit hits the fan, you've got your share portfolio tumbling, you don't know what's going on with your bonds because you didn't even understand them at the time that you bought them. Fixed income derivatives, who the fuck knows what they are, but you were told that they were a good thing to buy. You invested in some cryptocurrency that you still don't fucking understand. You don't really know what's going on with that. It's gone up in value, but how the fuck do you cash it in? So that's shit. You guys have got all of it, haven't you? Which is okay as well. So, my point is that at that point, are you in any real fit state to start making decisions on all of these things in front of you when you didn't even really understand them when you bought them? And you certainly didn't understand the relationship between them all. Like, who knows what the relationship between bonds and fixed income derivatives are? Well, I don't fucking know. Who really knows what the relationship between cryptocurrencies and gold are? Nobody, because they haven't been in bed together long enough for us to have any idea of patterns. So what I've always tried to do, even when I was in financial services, is follow where the big money is. And the big money really is only in three places. It's in bricks, mortar and land. It's in precious metals and other raw materials like raw resources. But for us, gold is the easiest one to get hold of and the easiest kind of party to join, so to speak. And it's either having the cash or controlling the banks. Does that make sense? So it's about saying, okay, well, let's follow the big money. Let's follow the big money. Don't worry about the little stuff, because that's just it's gonna be worthless anyway at some stage, and not down to maybe market movements, but just down to an ignorance about how it fits into the rest of your portfolio. Yeah? That's the challenge with all those other things. How does it fit in to your overall drive to greater levels of net worth? Because if that's the only number that we're worried about, then that's what everything should be plugging into, correct? Bigger levels of net worth. Okay, so these ratios I'm about to share with you now, they're my personal ratios. They were mentioned to me by one of my money mentors, a guy called Keith Cunningham. I don't know if anyone's come across him. It's a phenomenal guy. He wrote Robert Kiyosaki's first ever Rich Dad course, and Robert Kiyosaki credits Keith as being the rich dad in the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. So if you haven't come across him, Keith Cunningham is a brilliant Texan bloke, absolutely amazing bloke. Keith Cunningham. And basically what he was saying is, if you're anything over the age of 20, you're fucked. And if you're anything over the age of 20, because you are fooked, what you've got to do is make sure you start protecting straight away. So if you're less than 20, you can have most of your net worth here at this liquid and slightly more risky end, because you've got time to play. We just mentioned earlier, you've got cycles. If you make a mistake in one cycle, you've got another cycle to make it back on. If you make a mistake in that one, you've got another one to make it back on. But what we're saying is, if you're anything over the age of 20, you want 60% of your net worth at the illiquid end of the spectrum. Now, he wasn't talking to me about gold. Gold is something that I introduced into this model because I needed a hedge. I couldn't just have illiquid and liquid. It didn't make sense to me as an economist. It didn't make sense to me to just have illiquid and liquid, because there's nothing in that, without gold, there's nothing in the spectrum that has an inverse relationship to the thing that I'm trying to protect. Does that make sense? So I want something in my portfolio that has the opposite, or suffers the opposite impact on price that bricks and mortar does, and gold is that thing. And 15% in cash. Now this, although we're talking about cash, what we're talking about here is your trading arm of the business. So what might an example be in property of a trading strategy? Definitely deal packaging, deal sourcing,
Lettings.
flips.
I was going to say lettings.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got a lettings business, that's definitely trading. Rent to rents
Job.
are trading. Any job that you might have is trading. Make sense? So it's the stuff that is not investment linked. This is cash in the business, yeah? So it's trading. The goal is hedging. And in essence, the property is just building, growing, investing.
Can you just You just said something, and I didn't get it. You said that something to the effect that gold kind of operates almost contrary to property.
Opposite to property.
I didn't understand that.
So basically what happens is, a really good question, Steve. So what happens is, when that situation that we had where markets slump, so the stock market slumps, property prices slump, people lose their jobs, so your rent roll slumps, everything's on the way down.
But gold goes up.
Well, at the same time, now people are looking for what they call a safe haven. They're looking for, and that's an economics term, would you believe it, a safe haven, somewhere to put their money which is not losing value. So it would have been, for many years, the dollar. The dollar was always the safe haven. So when the shit hits the fan, everybody buys dollars because the dollar was seen as the safe haven. But actually that's become less and less so now, and everybody around the world knows that actually the dollar is a very flaky currency now. And it's fair to say that no matter what its relationship to the pound right now is Brexit led, but in global terms the dollar is a weak safe haven. So as the markets and as property and as everything else that people know and love is losing value, what people want to do then is they want to run to the safe havens. But remember, we're already in the safe havens. This is the whole idea. The safe haven goes up in value.
Because of demand.
Because, exactly right, Steve. So as more and more people run to that safe haven.
And a finite supply.
Exactly right.
So that's
exactly
commodities
right.
generally, I would have thought.
Kind of. But the reason, again, so people, I get asked a lot, why do you not talk about silver and palladium and platinum? But, isn't silver at a historic low, and palladium and platinum we're running out of, and all these questions? They're really valid questions, absolutely valid questions. But here's the thing: so silver, you may or may not know, is used in manufacturing, which means that it doesn't always have an inverse relationship to the markets, because of course if it's used in the making of these little bad boys, and the markets are taking a tumble, Kingston aren't selling as many of these, are they? So now, therefore, they're not buying as much silver as part of the manufacturing process. And the same with other commodities, you just don't know. I used to import and export coffee from Rwanda to Tilbury Docks here, and it was a great business to be in, except for the fact that you've got literally $250,000 worth of product at sea for 3 months. So if you think about that, commodities are like that. Commodities, you need lots and lots of money to get into them to make a very small fraction. I spoke to a coffee broker, a really young guy from the States. Dad's a billionaire, and I asked him a question. How do you make your first million in commodities? His answer was, start with $1 billion. And so again, that is it's a risky place to play if you don't understand the commodity itself. You've got to understand the vehicles that you're putting money into. Like, we get property. I know, and I can bet my bottom dollar that on your patch, you could value a property probably to the nearest 100 quid. I bet you. In your patch, you know what postcode areas and how much properties are. 4-bed detached in this area is going to be about £2.75 in Peterborough. But my point is, you know that market because you've lived and breathed it. That should be true for everything you put your money into. This is why this current crypto craze is fucking nonsense. I've got people who do not even understand the first thing about, can't even say the word cryptocurrency, asking me to comment yes in a fucking Facebook post if I want to get in on the next big crypto. I just hashtag Emperor's New Crypto. But my point is this, that the more times people see it on Facebook, the more they believe it. It becomes this like self-fulfilling prophecy. You see, everyone's talking about crypto. Everyone's asking you to comment yes in the box if you want to join a free webinar about the next big crypto and you want to get in early. But actually, no one really understands that it's not the crypto itself that is the thing that's going to stand the test of time and make people the money. It's the blockchain, correct? And that's all I know, by the way. That's a soundbite. I don't know anything else, which is why I'm not in cryptocurrencies. And sure, I mean, we've got Bitcoin. We bought, I don't know, whatever, a few Bitcoins when they were 800 quid. So they're what? They're about £6 grand now. But they're just that is here. That sits in here. If it goes, it goes. but it's only 15% of my net worth. Make sense?
Yeah.
If I lose all of that, i.e., and I hope that this never happens because I love my little baby. Say people stop coming to us. So the Legacy Makers Incubator is a business incubator for entrepreneurs. We teach people how to set up coaching and training businesses. How do you turn your knowledge and experience into products and profits? Everybody, I believe, if you've been doing anything for a period of time and you've solved a few problems, I believe everybody right now in the knowledge economy should have something that they sell in kind of knowledge terms. Does that make sense? A coaching business, a training business, anything. Even if it's just one course that you sell for 100 quid and you sell 100 copies a month online using kind of internet marketing. That's the 10 grand a month additional little side income. But if my business goes down the pan and nobody comes to our accelerator programs, it's kind of okay because it's only 15% of my net worth. If all the other things, the cryptos, the derivatives, all the other bonds, if all of that stuff goes down the pan, it doesn't matter because it sits here. It's the stuff I have fun with. Yeah? This is the bit that we cannot afford to lose. But yet this is the bit that most people are most at risk of losing. Yeah? So what happens then? I'm just going to finish. I'll just finish this flow, and then I'll take questions. Is that okay? You probably realise now I can go off on weird and wonderful little journeys, and have a great conversation. But I'll just finish this flow, and then I'll take some questions. So values go down, rent roll goes down, your ass starts twitching, but now the value of your gold has gone up, which means you can liquidate some of this to shore up your portfolio, but also to protect your business, whatever the business is, by the way. So I know when the shit hits the fan, I know that we will still be standing, because when everybody else, when all the other business incubators, when the other accelerator programs, when all the other people teaching what we do go down the pan, what are we going to do? When they stop spending money on marketing, what's the first thing that we're going to do? We're going to spend a fuckload of money on marketing. Not because we expect it to generate us a revenue, by the way. Not because we expect people to buy our stuff, but so that we can keep our brand in the mind space of all the people who may potentially one day become customers. So our marketing strategy, this is between us, our marketing strategy when the shit hits the fan is we'll just pump out shed loads of free content. All free content, helping our prospects survive the turbulent times. And we'll pay for that content to get to those people. In the same way that when we liquidate the gold, we'll be able to help landlords who are at risk. Right now, we've been, and as I say, we've been really blessed, and I don't know what the fuck happened from 2013 to now. Well, I've got a fair idea what happened, but we have been really, really blessed. So we've just this year, not 3% of our net worth, by the way, but 3% of our entire portfolio holding, we've just given to our local council on a peppercorn rent. So all local councils have been mandated by central government to allocate properties for the Syrian refugees coming in. And my parents came to this country as refugees. They stayed on an army camp for the first few weeks they were in the country. They then got taken in by a beautiful couple, Keith and Elizabeth, down in Bristol. So they had a really shitty time of it when they first came here. But not quite as shitty as the people that are having right now, because at least then we had facilities. They had an army base to go and stay on, because they were, in essence, they were British citizens from the colony. And I've always wanted to be that person who can stand there at the front of the queue and say, if you need help, we're here to support you, we're here to help you. So we've been buying up huge swathes of land in order to set up high-rise farms and all that kind of crazy shit for when the shit does hit the fan. But we've just given away 3% of our portfolio on a peppercorn rent to our local council so they can house the Syrian families that they've been allocated. So these, I'm not talking about hundreds of properties, but were it not for this, we would never be able to do that. We would never be able to do that. My wife and I have spent the last couple of years just paying down the debt on the portfolio, and all of that's allowed us to to do some nice things, and it's not all altruistic. There's a feel-good factor about it, and you know, we get to pat ourselves on the back over a nice gin and tonic on a Friday night. You're a very good girl, darling. Yes, you're a very good boy, Dillon. You know, it's nice. I felt shit for most of my life, so it's nice to feel good for a brief moment. So that's what happens. You liquidate the gold. You shore up your property portfolio. You shore up any businesses that need a cash injection because revenues have gone down, and you've probably got loans to pay here as well as loans to pay here. That's the reality. And that's how the allocation works. Now, when the shit's not hitting the fan, you're making all of your money here. So our education business operates at about a 71.2-ish gross margin, because we're selling knowledge. This is why I believe everyone should sell knowledge. You need to sell knowledge. If you've been in anything for a while and you've had a load of shit and you've solved a few problems, turn the solution into a course and help those people a couple of paces behind you to do exactly the same. Kind of what we're doing right now. I'm only a couple of paces ahead. I'm not, you know, I'm not miles and miles ahead of anyone. In fact, there's probably people in this room with more experience and bigger portfolios than I've got, and that's, I'm absolutely sure of that. But because we make all of our money here, this obviously grows much faster, doesn't it, than anything else. So in essence, what you do, this grows quickly. 16%, 17%, 18%, 20% of net worth. So what you've got to do is reallocate those percentages back into that. So as that's growing, you feel like it's £1 million net worth, that's 600 grand, 250 grand, 150 grand. If that grows to £300,000, now you've got £1,300,000, just keep the numbers really simple. Well, you need to make sure that out of that 1,300,000, 60% sits here, 25% sits here, 15% sits here. So you can do your reallocation. We do ours on a quarterly basis because things move quickly in our world. So we do that on a quarterly basis, but you could do it on a annual basis or a 6 monthly basis, or to start with, whilst you get into grips with it, do it on a monthly basis. There won't be any movement on a monthly basis, probably, but just to get to grips with it, just so that you know, next time somebody asks you, what's your net worth to the nearest £1,000, to be fair, as investors, hands up if you want to create wealth. Yeah, really, as investors, as people in the wealth creation space, we've got to know what that number is. So if nothing else from tonight, kind of take on the strategies, the principle of this, and understand what your net worth is and where the allocations are. Even if you don't allocate and reallocate to start with. But keep things simple, understand the principle, understand where you are on the spectrum, and kind of act accordingly. And we've got time, like I don't know when the crash is coming, obviously I've got no idea when the crash is coming. But I do know that we're not long into the uplift, just from looking at what's been happening now. So Pri and I bought our house, we got married in May 2014. Yeah, we did a month, I think we completed on the house while we were on honeymoon. So we were a month on honeymoon, so we probably completed on it June 2014. And we bought our house for the same price as the seller had bought it for in 2009.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So, and since then, it's probably gone up by, I don't know, maybe 12, 13%, 14%, something of that order. And so the point I'm making is that I just see that we're only really at the beginning of that upturn. Sure, houses are going quick. You only got to flipping breathe on a commercial property before the fucker's gone. You know, a piece of land, you just, like Mo was saying, you just can't find them. So things are going quick, which is the sign of a fast-moving, fast-paced uplift market, isn't it? So I don't know how long it's going to last for. Hopefully, a while yet, so that it gives you a bit of time to build that. Hands up if that was useful at all. Any questions, comments, queries? I'm going to go to the back, then I'll come to the guys at the front. Hello, mate.
Yeah, hiya. Just wondering about this gold. How, as somebody relatively new into property, how do I know what I'm buying is gold? How do I protect that gold? I mean, you have to go into the ins and outs, but ballpark. I've seen people been burgled, all their gold reserves taken.
Mental, fucking metal detectors and all sorts, isn't there? There's
Yeah.
crazy shit going on at the moment, yeah.
So,
Okay, so actually this will be a perfect bridge into.
Your
But actually, that said, what I said to Mo was that Mo said, "Are you going to be selling anything?" And I'm not selling anything at all. We've got an event. It's a 2-day event. It's called the Mad Millionaire Intensive. It's 2 days down in Peterborough, where I talk much more about this. I also talk about the subject of my next book, which is Millionaire: A Moral Imperative. So how we, in this position, have a real imperative to become millionaires and try in some way to bridge the gap between rich and poor. So it's it's what we call in the trade a delivery event, which means there's no sales at the event either. So it's pure content, 2 days of content. It normally sells for over £1,000, but we're doing it for £100 plus VAT as early bird tickets, and 80% of the revenue goes to our One Child, One School project. So genuinely no sale, there's no sale at the event as well. I'd love for as many of you to come down as you can. But just to answer that question, so really there's 2 ways to think about gold, and one way is as insurance, and the other way is as investment. And in this instance, we're talking about gold as investment. So here, we're talking about gold that you buy, which is as close to the spot price as possible. So we're talking about kilo bars, 1 ounce coins. You can even get now ½ ounce and ¼ ounce coins as well. But we're talking about gold that is as close to the spot price as possible. So the spot price is the kind of the centrally fixed price, and then, well, not that you look like somebody that buys drugs, but I'm just going to use an analogy from when I was young. So when I was little, growing up in the council estate, all I wanted to do was be that guy in the red BMW convertible with the blonde and the cash and the time and all that. What did you think he sold? Drugs, obviously. We do the same now. We buy gold in massive chunks, and we chop it up into small pieces, and we ship it to people's doors in discrete packages. But they're 1 gram pieces, and that's insurance gold, not investment gold. Insurance gold is the gold that you might need to use. So I was in Zimbabwe in 2008 working with the Ministries of Finance, or the Ministers of Finance and the central bank there, which was literally just after Zimbabwe went into mental hyperinflation. It's fucking crazy. A 10 trillion Zimbabwean dollar notes being printed. And I remember the Minister of Finance said to me and my team, I'm not going to do the accent, "What should I do?" And my flippant remark was, "Get more fucking ink for the printer, because all you can do right now, there's no coming back from this." So if we are ever in a situation where hyperinflation kicks in and the value of the pound notes that we have go down £1, and now you can't even buy a tank of fuel with the 50 quid you've got in your pocket because the 50 quid is worthless, that's when your insurance gold kicks in. So this is, again, this is the type of gold that most people don't even worry about, but it's the type of gold that you really do need to worry about, because when the shit hits the fan, I'm getting to the front of that queue, whether it's for groceries or whether it's for fuel. And if you, on Wikipedia, you'll see the 12 countries that have had the biggest damaging impacts of hyperinflation. You'll be surprised at what countries are on that list. It's the countries that you would never ever imagine would fall into that kind of trouble. And so we're not immune from it, particularly now that we're kind of getting a bit more insular and we're detaching ourselves from the rest of the world. We are not immune to that entire system collapsing. So that's the 2 types of gold: investment gold and insurance gold. You buy in terms of investment gold, buy the stuff that everybody knows of. So that's Britannia's, the 2017 Britannia. Don't get 2012 or before, because they had less gold in them. The Britannia, the Krugerrand, the Maple Leaf, they're all good coins, good, solid, well-known coins to buy. Buy kilo bars from reputable refineries. Make sure that it's got a certificate of SEO, basically a signature on it. As long as you buy from well-known refineries, that's really all you can do. There's nothing you can really do. You could do tests, and you can have a home testing kit and things like that. But there's nothing really you can do other than buy from reputable refineries and make sure that everything you buy has a certificate to know that the gold you're getting is actual gold.
So
So you're buying physical gold and putting it somewhere, whether it's
Yeah.
in the bank safe or.
I've never put it in the bank safe
Right.
because apparently everything that's in the bank safe is theirs. They take ownership when you put it in the safe. It's crazy.
Store it and bring
So-
mat, don't you?
Sorry?
Brinks mat and
Yeah, you
stuff
can
like
store it, Brinks mat, but and now even there are so many high security deposit boxes opening up everywhere that I wouldn't tell anyone where I'm storing it if I were you, and I would store it at multiple sites.
There's one in Hatton Garden, that's not very good.
Sorry?
There's one in Hatton Garden,
No,
that's
that's
not
not
very
good.
Yeah, that got done, didn't it? But what ours, we keep all ours at Switzerland, and I know this sounds a bit jet set and celebrity, and I really don't fucking mean it to, but we've got a contract with a private airline company to get out to Switzerland as soon as we need to when the shit hits the fan. So we've forward paid for that in advance, a return trip to Switzerland based on their future fuel prices. So because we didn't want them to turn around and say, no, we're not taking you because what you've paid isn't enough, we've got someone else paying more. So what their future fuel prices were, and we've got a return flight to the vault in Switzerland if we need to. I take this very fucking seriously. Like, I do not want to be in that place where I'm 107 grand down again. I don't want to be there, and I don't want any of you to be there either. I don't want all this work you're putting in to go down the pan. Like, you guys work fucking hard at what you do, you know. Adam.
Have you heard of someone told me not so long ago that he's got money invested in gold, and it somehow works as a current account, and the interest that he accrues, he can actually go out and literally spend on a cash card.
So, I would imagine that what they're doing is the same as a normal bank works. See, when a bank's got your money, what's it doing with your money to make money?
Lending
It's
it.
investing it and lending it out. Correct. So what they're doing, you can make money lending out your gold. It's a real way to make money on having gold. I say don't bother, because you're not using the gold to get a return on. It doesn't matter whether you make any return on it or not. The gold that you're having it's not for today, it's for tomorrow. So today's fluctuations, who gives a shit about? Gold price drops, I'll go and buy more. But I'm not interested in it making me any money. But what they're probably doing, Adam, is they're probably lending that gold out and then taking some of the return and then paying some of the return forward to the person that owns the gold.
Right.
I would advise him to ask for that money to be reinvested. So I'd ask him to just, well, I wouldn't ask him anything because I don't know, but if I were in his shoes, I would be looking at having, rather than getting that money in cash, I'd just ask them to just keep reinvesting it.
He's basically done it for a similar, from what I gathered off him, he's done it for a similar sort of reason, so that when everything hits the fan,
Yeah.
people still get gold. You know, like you said, you're still going to get to the front of the queue when you're in Tesco's.
Mate, totally.
Whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's all sorts of stuff about, can it get confiscated? Is it legal tender? Like, when the shit hits the fan, who gives a fuck? Really? Like, I just care about feeding that 5,000 people I've got stuck on a fucking field in Cornwall because I said I could help them, and feed my family, and feed any of our tenants that are now in the shit, and support any landlords that need supporting. That's all I care about when the downturn comes, you know? So the gold right now is for tomorrow. Make the money here, store it here, and invest it here.
So are you saying that at any given point, it doesn't matter what the gold price is, either buy it or sell it to get that ratio, to keep that ratio going?
Okay, great question. I never sell it. So all I do, because this is the bit that grows the most,
Yeah.
I never have a situation where I need to move anything out of here into here. Because, and again, it's a slight nuance in the way I'm calculating this. I calculate this 25% on the average price per kilo that I've paid. So I never calculate it on today's price. I only calculate that
What you
on the
paid for
average prices I paid for it,
Yeah.
because otherwise I need to account for market fluctuations, which is not the point of here. So I never have a situation, Steve, where I'm having to move money out of gold and put it somewhere else. My flow only ever goes that way, which is why everyone should have something that they're trading to make the big cash amount, so that you you're basically topping up the other two pots with what you make in there. Really good question. Is this useful, by the way, guys?
Yeah.
Great.
That's wildly different to trading gold then, isn't it? So I mean, you can buy shares in gold.
Yeah,
and
ETFs,
blah,
all
blah,
sorts
and
of
all that
stuff.
kind of
Paper
stuff.
gold.
Is it still worth doing that,
Mate, I
or would
wouldn't
you
touch
not
it.
even bother?
I wouldn't
Just
touch it.
literally buy the stuff.
Think about when you want it. You
Right.
want it when the shit's hitting the fan.
You don't
When
want
the
to-
shit's hitting
you
the
don't have to
fan,
shell
the
shares,
guys that
shell
have given you
shares.
gold on paper,
Yeah.
you won't find them probably. And I'm not discrediting anybody that sells it to trades ETFs or anything like that, but think about when you want it.
Yeah.
When you want it is when you need to act really bloody quick. Because if you don't, everything that you've worked for is going down the pan.
So Rob Moore talks about coup grants, doesn't he? That's what he.
Possibly, yeah, possibly.
Well, the ones he's got in his right-hand pocket.
Yeah, possibly. But yeah, Krugerrands, Maple Leafs, Britannias, all good coins. Okay.
So, let's say for example, visiting an Asian jeweller's and buying a 24-carat bangle.
Yeah.
Is that the similar sort of thing as to what you're mentioning there, or is that completely different?
So the reason I don't buy jewellery is because I look bad in it, but more than that, is because you're not getting it as close to the spot price as you can, because there's design and manufacture gone into it. So
For
You want
example,
the raw.
you can get like just a plain simple bangle with no stones, no nothing.
yeah,
Still would work, doesn't it?
Obviously based on their price, whatever price they offer to you.
yeah, mate, I wouldn't. I would. Well, I
Maybe
mean,
retail that.
we do sell gold, gram pieces, coins, all sorts. We always beat the Royal Mint prices, by the way. So we've got a plan. It's called the Money Box Metals Plan, and that's for insurance gold. And basically, that allows. So it's one of my big things was to take gold investment out to everyday people. Everything we want to do is to take it down to that man down there. So we sell, like I said, we ship grams of gold to people's doors for as little as 55 quid a month. So it's people that want to invest small amounts, anywhere from 55 quid a month to 500 quid a month on gram pieces. But for bigger pieces, for coins, yeah, I mean, drop me a line. We
Yeah,
always beat Royal Mint prices. Fucking hell, we beat Royal Mint prices on the Britannia. I feel like calling them up, you cheeky fuckers. You make these, and I'm getting them cheaper than you're selling them. Anyway, that's the Royal Mint. So give us a shout. But and even if you don't call us, get the gold that is investment gold.
Got it.
Yeah, rather than jewelry.
Yeah.
Good question. Any other questions, comments, queries, thoughts?
You need to go.
Yeah, I keep looking at the clock. Yeah, 9:15 the train is. So,
Where are we in the cycle at the moment?
Steve, I wish I could
Property-
tell you.
Well, where do you think we are?
Personally, I think we're pretty early in the cycle. Like, I guess I'm probably a bit more of an optimist than most, but I do think just looking at our own experiences, looking at the price of the house that we bought, looking at my experiences for commercial. So we're looking at the moment for a commercial property for the incubator, not to convert, but for our business, and everything gets snapped up. Looking at plots of land, how quickly they go.
Okay, so-
Looking at how many people are being gazumped and missing out on homes. It's the same.
So in general,
Yep.
property and anything else you bung into that pot, relatively strong, which by definition says gold at the moment
Relatively
is
weak,
relatively
correct.
weak, therefore good time to buy.
Definitely a good time to buy.
That was the
Sorry,
Steve. Gist of the
okay,
question.
I thought you meant where are we in the overall economic cycle, but yes, so
Where-
good time to buy
where are
gold.
we in-
Yeah,
in
about
this
$1,200
bit?
$1,200 at the moment.
Say again?
$1,200.
Kilo.
Troy ounce.
A kilo?
30 plus $1,000 for a kilo. So 31.1 grams to a troy ounce, not like the grams that.
What's a troy ounce?
It's a different kind of ounce to the ones that the dealers sell on the council estates.
And
Yeah, they're only 28 grams.
And
aren't
if
they?
you, so if you take an extreme position
Yeah.
where you say, right, we've just gone to the, we've reached that peak in the property market and we're now on the turn,
Mm.
and it goes there,
Yeah.
What kind of value difference have we seen in the past between
Well, here's the
right at the
interesting-
bottom of gold and right at the top of
Here's
gold?
the interesting thing. If you look at the most recent changes, there isn't that massive dichotomy between one price and another, simply because there's so much other stuff going on in the marketplace. But we're talking about when the shit totally
sure.
hits the fan and the Governor of the Bank of England has no more tools at his disposal, and Yellen
Well,
at the
so-
Fed Reserve doesn't have any tools, so we go right back to basics.
So what happened in 2007?
Gold prices didn't shift a huge amount. They went up slightly from where they
Because the
were.
property market went.
It did, but if you look at what's happened since then, gold prices have nearly doubled since then.
Really?
Yeah. So they're 1,200, probably 1.5 times actually. Gold peaked at $800, $1,800. So we did see the spike, and now it's settled back down again. So we did see the spike, although it just wasn't as immediate as we thought it might have been. But
And
there
am I
was
right
a
in
spike to
thinking it's still a very controlled commodity in terms of production of new gold?
Yeah, it is. And what's happened as well is that a lot of the newer, younger mines, when it spiked, lots and lots of new mines came into the marketplace. So we had lots of African mines, young African mines, come into the marketplace because now it was worth mining for gold. But they reckon it costs about $1,100 to mine a troy ounce of gold. And so, because we're at 1,200, it's just that a lot of the younger mines went out of business.
No point in mining.
Yeah, right, correct. So yes, it is a control market. It's about going right back to kind of fundamental, so first principles. It's about going right back to first principles. Once everything is stripped out, once all the controls, all the measures, all the policies, once all of that is taken out, and you're literally just left with dirt, bricks, and precious metals, what's the relationship between them all? I did a post in 2000 and something, maybe 13 or 14, talking about how we were in the eye of the storm. So if you think about a tornado, probably a shit analogy to use considering what we've just been through this year, but if you think about the eye of a storm, 2008 we went through one side of the storm, now we're in the eye of the storm. But when we come out the other side of the storm, it's going to be much worse because of all the debris that's flying around now. We've just had years and years and years and years of debris just being collected and collected and collected and collected. So as we head out the other end of that storm, that's when I believe we'll get even more kind of effects that are based on first principles than we saw 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11-ish, 12-ish, and then kind of the upturn started to happen. So yeah, interesting times. And look, I definitely didn't want to come here on a Tuesday night and give you a whole load of doom and gloom. What I wanted to show you was a workable strategy that you can start using right now. Calculate your net worth, look at where you are positioned, and then just take it from there and start kind of just allocating, reallocating, get some equity in your portfolios. One of the things that we love doing, I'm just going to put my stuff on as I'm talking, if that's all right. One of the things that we love doing is just having equity in the portfolio so that we become good lenders. We become lendable.
Yeah.
Like I want to be lendable. I want to be lendable. I want to know that when I need the money, when asset values are going down, I'm going to get the money. And the biggest transfer of capital, the biggest transfer of wealth takes place when the markets crash. And the only reason that happens is because the people that have got the money, we're not buying at the moment. We're paying down debt, we're increasing cash reserves, and we're waiting for that drop in asset prices so that we can go in and hopefully save a few people, protect a few people, and make a bit of money in the process. So look, I'm going to leave these with Mo. I think we've got 23 odd left. I gave a couple away. There's one in the prize draw as well. The one in the prize draw is free entry. If you want to come to the Mad Millionaire Intensive, I'd love to see you all. There's 2 days, 16th and 17th of December is the next one, 16th and 17th of December. So yeah, nice pre-Christmas little party. Can you get my details off Mo? Is that all right?
Yeah,
Guys,
yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you so
Also, it was fantastic. Dillon is fantastic. So, Sharon is here. She's waiting to get on the bus. gonna have a quick 10-minute break, tea and coffee, freshen up. Maybe double up on the coffee, because we're going to have a tax session next.
He analyses everything. He never mentioned gold.
Right, young man, how are you?
No, I forgot my clicker.
Keep it at your house.
Well, I must admit, I'm sure.
Yeah, but that's what
I just thought you
No, I'm sure I'll put it away. Yeah, I mean,
you're sitting there physically somewhere and you have a
Yeah, I'll put it back out.
a piece of paper that says you own X amount. I never thought yodel turning up.
But these guys are professionals. Traceable transactions and all sorts.
This guy down there now is a proper
Literally just thought you got a certificate.
Because I thought I'm not going to invest
After all
in
years,
gold.
I just thought,
Half interest.
you know, when I was
Somewhere bury a safe into the foundations of your house.
I got fed up with the way football was being run as well.
I'm not at that stage yet.
I just now look at it.
Yeah, you are.
It could be
I'm delivering one step to people from as little as £55 a month. Even a modest